I want to talk to you about hell. Not because I believe in it, I don't, but because the concept of hell reveals something extraordinarily important about the moral bankruptcy of religious thinking. The doctrine of hell, eternal, conscious torment as punishment for finite crimes, is perhaps the most wicked idea ever conceived by the human mind, and yet billions of people claim to believe in it. They claim to worship a God who has created such a system. They claim this God is loving, just, and merciful. I want to examine this claim. I want to pull it apart piece by piece. And I think by the time we're done, you'll see why this doctrine is not just false, it's morally obscene. Let me start with the basics. What is hell, according to traditional Christian theology? And I focus on Christianity here because the Christian conception of hell is particularly well developed and particularly sadistic, though Islam's version runs a close second. Hell, we're told, is a place or a state of eternal conscious torment. Fire and brimstone, weeping and gnashing of teeth, outer darkness where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. The descriptions vary, but the core idea is consistent. Infinite punishment for finite crimes. Now, let's be very clear about what infinite means. It doesn't mean a very long time. It doesn't mean 1 trillion years. It means forever, without end. After the first 1 billion years of torture, you're no closer to the end than when you started. After the first 1 trillion years, you haven't even begun to make a dent in eternity. Think about that. Really think about it. The worst person you can imagine, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, take your pick, spent maybe 70 or 80 years committing atrocities. Terrible, unforgivable atrocities. But 70 or 80 years, a finite amount of evil committed in a finite amount of time. And for this, hell offers infinite punishment. Torture that never ends. Suffering that has no purpose except suffering itself. Because after a certain point, it can't be about rehabilitation, there is no release. It can't be about deterrence. The damned are beyond being deterred. It can only be about revenge. Pure, sadistic revenge. And this is the God we're supposed to worship? Now, let me address the various attempts to make hell seem less monstrous, because there are theologians who've spent centuries trying to rationalize this doctrine. The first rationalization is this: hell isn't fire and brimstone. That's metaphorical. Hell is simply separation from God. It's the natural consequence of rejecting God's love. All right, interesting attempt. But let's think about this carefully. If hell is simply separation from God, and I don't believe God exists in the first place, then hell should be exactly what I'm experiencing now, which is to say, it's fine. I'm not in torment. I'm not gnashing my teeth. I'm living a perfectly satisfactory life, thank you very much. But that's not what the doctrine teaches, is it? Even in its sophisticated form, hell involves suffering, profound suffering, eternal suffering, because a God who is perfect love cannot bear to have anyone separated from him, and so that separation is agonizing. Well, which is it? Is God's love so overwhelming that being without it is torture? Or is free will so important that God allows us to reject him? You can't have both. If separation from God is inherently torturous, then we don't have genuine freedom to reject him. We're being coerced by the threat of unbearable suffering. This is like a man saying to a woman, I love you so much and you're free to leave me, but if you do, you'll be miserable forever because my love is so wonderful. That's not love. That's emotional blackmail. That's abuse. The second rationalization, people choose hell. God doesn't send anyone to hell, they send themselves there by rejecting him. This is perhaps the most common defense, and it's sophistry of the highest order. Let me ask you something. If I dug a pit in my backyard, filled it with burning coals, built a fence around it with a sign that says, don't climb this fence or you'll fall in the pit and burn forever, and then you climbed the fence and fell in, would you say you chose to burn? Or would you say I created a trap? God, we're told, created hell. He created the system whereby people end up there. He established the rules. He decided what counts as a sin worthy of eternal punishment. He created humans, knowing in advance, because he's omniscient, that billions of them would end up in hell. And then we're told they chose it? No. If you create a system where the consequence of using your free will in certain ways is eternal torture, and you knew in advance that billions would make those choices, then you are responsible for that torture. You can't hide behind the fig leaf of free will. If I built a car that I knew would explode and kill the driver if they drove over 60 miles per hour, and then I blamed the driver for choosing to die when they drove 65, you'd rightly call me a murderer. The fact that they had free will to choose their speed is irrelevant. I created the death trap. The third rationalization, sin against an infinite God requires infinite punishment. Let me make sure I understand this argument. The magnitude of a crime is determined not by the act itself or by the harm it causes, but by the status of the entity offended. So if I insult my neighbor, that's a minor offense. If I insult the president, that's a more serious offense. And if I insult an infinite God, that's an infinitely serious offense requiring infinite punishment. This is feudal morality. This is the logic of medieval monarchy, where insulting the king was considered worse than murdering a peasant because of the king's superior status. And we've rejected this logic in every other area of life. We don't think CEOs deserve more protection from insults than janitors. We don't think celebrities should get extra compensation when they're slandered. We've recognized that human dignity is universal, that a crime's seriousness is determined by harm done, not by the victim's social status. But God apparently missed that memo. God is so insecure, so vain, so desperate for respect, that any slight against his cosmic ego requires eternal torture. What kind of God is this? What kind of moral system is this? If I told you there was a human king who tortured people forever for the crime of not respecting him properly, you'd call him a psychopath. But when God does it, we're supposed to call it justice. Now, let's talk about what actually sends you to hell, according to most Christian denominations. And this is where the moral obscenity becomes truly apparent. Is it murder, rape, torture, genocide? Well, maybe, but here's the thing, those sins can be forgiven. If you murder someone, but you accept Jesus as your savior before you die, you go to heaven, you're washed clean. You get eternal bliss. But if you're a good person, kind, generous, compassionate, but you were born in the wrong part of the world and never heard of Jesus, or you heard of him but weren't convinced by the evidence, then you go to hell forever. Let me repeat that, because it's important. A serial killer who accepts Jesus in prison goes to heaven, but a moral atheist who spent his life helping others goes to hell. Gandhi goes to hell for being Hindu, the Dalai Lama goes to hell for being Buddhist, Anne Frank goes to hell for being Jewish and dying before she could convert. A child born in rural Afghanistan who was taught Islam from birth goes to hell for believing what he was taught. But Jeffrey Dahmer, who accepted Christ in prison, he's in paradise. This is not a moral system. This is a loyalty test. It's cosmic totalitarianism. Believe the right thing, profess loyalty to the right authority figure, and your actual behavior barely matters. And it gets worse, because even among Christians, there's profound disagreement about who goes to hell and why. Catholics say you need faith plus works. Protestants say faith alone. Some say baptism is required. Some say speaking in tongues is evidence of salvation. Some say you can lose your salvation. Others say once saved, always saved. In other words, the rules for avoiding eternal torture are unclear. God has established a system where the stakes are literally infinite, either eternal bliss or eternal torment, but he couldn't be bothered to make the rules clear. Imagine if a government enacted a law where the penalty for violation was death, but they couldn't agree on what the law actually said. Some bureaucrats insist you need to file Form A, others insist Form B. Still others say you need both forms plus a notarized affidavit. And if you get it wrong, you die. You'd call that government unjust. You'd call it tyrannical. You'd demand clarity, fairness, due process. But God gets a pass. God can be as unclear as he wants, can allow his followers to contradict each other for 2,000 years about the conditions for salvation, and we're supposed to just figure it out ourselves or burn forever. Let me address something that often comes up at this point. Someone will say, but Hitchens, you don't understand. Hell isn't about punishment. It's about the natural consequence of sin. Sin separates us from God, and hell is just the logical result. All right? Let's examine that. First, if hell is a natural consequence rather than a punishment, why does God allow it to exist? If I build a house and I notice that the staircase has a flaw that will cause people to fall and break their necks, I fix the staircase. I don't shrug and say, well, that's just the natural consequence of using faulty stairs. God supposedly created the entire moral architecture of the universe. He decided what counts as sin. He established the consequences.